The world did not end with a bang, but with the rough scratch of burlap and the definitive slam of a car trunk. One moment, Lena Kovac was a woman in control, a rising star in a prestigious Seattle architecture firm. Her life a curated collection of clean lines, strategic 5-year plans, and measured emotions. The next, she was a commodity, bundled and stored in suffocating darkness. The fear was not a sudden spike. It was a slow, cold infusion, seeping into her veins like ice water. She could smell the stale gasoline fumes, feel the vibration of the road through the metal frame, and hear the muffled, indecipherable voices of the men in the front seat. Her mind, usually a whirlwind of design solutions and client presentations, was terrifyingly blank. There was no plan for this. The car stopped. Doors opened and closed. Heavy footsteps. The trunk latch released, flooding her confined space with the dim, gray light of a cloudy evening. Rough hands grabbed her, hauling her out. Her heels, the same black Prada pumps she'd worn to her final meeting, scraped uselessly against gravel. "Move," a voice grunted, deep and devoid of inflection. She was half dragged, half carried into a building that smelled of damp rot, rust, and forgotten things. A warehouse, maybe. Then down a flight of concrete stairs. A heavy door creaked open, and she was thrown forward, landing hard on a cold, unforgiving floor. The burlap sack was ripped from her head. She blinked, her eyes struggling to adjust. A single, bare bulb hung from a wire, casting a jaundiced glow over a small, windowless basement room. Exposed pipes snaked across the ceiling, and water dripped somewhere in a steady, maddening rhythm. 3 figures stood over her, silhouetted against the light. The one in the center stepped forward. He was in his late 40s, with a face that looked like it had been weathered by hard living and harder choices. His eyes were the color of slate, and they held no warmth, only a cold, calculating stillness. "My name is Marcus," he said, his voice calm, which was somehow more frightening than if he had shouted. "You're Lena Kovac. Your father is Alexei Kovac of Kovac Global Holdings. You are worth a great deal to him. You will be worth a great deal to us." To his right stood a mountain of a man, with a thick neck and knuckles that were scarred and calloused. He cracked them now, the sound like small gunshots in the quiet room. He didn't speak, just stared at her with a flat, predatory gaze. This was Rico. And then there was the third. He was younger, perhaps in his late 20s. He lingered a step behind the others, his shoulders slightly hunched. He had messy brown hair and eyes that were a startling shade of hazel, but it was the expression in them that caught Lena's breath. They weren't cold. They were full of a deep, profound misery. He was looking at her, but he seemed to be seeing something else, something far away and painful. This was Kai. "Please," Lena gasped, her voice trembling. "Let me go. My father will pay you. You don't have to do this." Marcus backhanded her. The blow was swift and shocking, snapping her head to the side. White-hot pain exploded across her cheekbone. Tears sprang to her eyes, unbidden. "The next time you speak without permission," Marcus said, his voice still eerily calm, "Rico will break one of your fingers. Do you understand?" Lena could only nod, choking back a sob. She curled into a ball on the floor, the reality of her situation crashing down on her with the weight of a collapsing building. This was not a negotiation. She was not a person here. She was inventory. As Marcus and Rico turned to leave, she saw the young one, Kai, hesitate for a fraction of a second. His eyes met hers, and in that fleeting moment, she saw it again, a flash of something that looked like shame. Then he turned and followed the others out, the heavy door closing with a final, resonant thud. The sound of a key turning in the lock was the loudest sound she had ever heard. She was alone, a prisoner, and her only hope seemed to lie in the tormented eyes of her youngest captor. The first 48 hours were a cycle of fear, disorientation, and crushing boredom. Time lost all meaning. The single bulb burned incessantly, creating an eternal, artificial day. The only markers were the deliveries of food and water. It was always Kai who brought them. He would unlock the door, enter silently, place a bottle of water and a plastic-wrapped sandwich on the floor just inside the door, and leave without making eye contact. The first time, Lena had scrambled back into the farthest corner, expecting violence. He had simply ignored her, his movements mechanical. On the third day, a deep chill settled into the basement. Lena, dressed only in the silk blouse and trousers from her abduction, began to shiver uncontrollably. Her teeth chattered. When Kai came with her evening meal, he paused. He looked at her, huddled and shaking, and for a long moment, he just stood there, a war playing out on his face. Then, without a word, he turned and left. He returned a minute later with a thin, gray, scratchy blanket. It smelled of dust and mildew. He tossed it towards her, not getting too close, and left again, locking the door behind him. It was the first small act of humanity she had witnessed, and it felt more significant than any of the threats from Marcus. That blanket became her greatest comfort. It was also her first clue that Kai was different. Late on the fourth night, the shouting started. It came from the room above her, muffled by the floorboards, but clear enough to understand. "Can't keep stalling." Marcus's voice, raised in fury. "They're verifying the drop instructions. It's $10 million, Marcus. They're not just going to throw it in a bag and hope for the best." That was Kai's voice, strained and desperate. "We don't have time for their verification processes. My contact says the FBI is already being looped in. We just need 2 more days, just 2. Kai's plea was raw. "The hospital. They sent the final notice. They'll stop her treatment if I don't make a payment by Friday. They'll send her home to die." There was a heavy silence. "Your personal problems are not my concern," Marcus said, his voice low and dangerous. "The timeline is the timeline. If they don't pay by Friday, we move to phase 2. And you know what that means." Lena's blood ran cold. Phase 2. She didn't know what it was, but it couldn't be good. And Kai, a hospital? Treatment? He was doing this for someone who was sick. When Kai brought her breakfast the next morning, his eyes were puffy and red-rimmed. He moved like a man carrying an invisible, back-breaking weight. As he set down the water bottle, his hand trembled slightly. Lena, emboldened by the cold and the fear and the shared misery, spoke softly. "Who's in the hospital?" Kai froze. He didn't look at her. "I heard you arguing," she pressed, her voice barely a whisper. "Last night. You need the money for someone." He turned to leave, his hand on the door handle. "Please," Lena said. "Just tell me." He stopped. His shoulders slumped in defeat. He didn't turn around, but he spoke, his voice so low she had to strain to hear it. "My sister." He left, locking the door. But later that day, during his next check, a small, worn photograph slid under the door. Lena crawled over and picked it up with trembling fingers. It was a picture of a little girl no more than 10 years old. She was bald, her head smooth and pale, but she was smiling a radiant, gap-toothed smile that lit up her entire face. She had the same kind, hazel eyes as Kai. Tucked in the hospital bed beside her, his arm around her, was a younger, less haunted-looking Kai. He was smiling too, but even then, Lena could see the worry in his eyes. Scrawled on the back of the photo in a looping, feminine hand was, "My brave Kai and me. Love, Alara." Lena stared at the photo until her vision blurred. The monster had a name. The monster had a little sister with leukemia. The monster was a scared big brother trying to perform a miracle with damned hands. The narrative of her captivity had just been completely rewritten. The knowledge of Kai's motive created a fragile, unspoken truce. Lena stopped seeing him as just a kidnapper. He became a person, a tragic figure in her own nightmare. She started talking to him during his brief visits, not pleading or demanding, but just talking. "What's her name?" she asked one day, holding up the photograph he'd left. He hesitated, his guard visibly up. "Ilara," he said finally, the name spoken with a reverence that was entirely at odds with their surroundings. "She's beautiful." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "She's a terror. Tough as nails. The nurses are scared of her." He told her, in stuttering, hesitant sentences, about the car accident that had killed their parents 6 years ago. He'd been 22, suddenly the sole guardian of a 4-year-old girl. I was all she had, he whispered, leaning against the doorframe, his gaze distant. I worked 2 jobs. I got my electrician's license. We were making it. It was hard, but we were okay. Then, the diagnosis. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia. The insurance, it maxed out fast. The experimental treatments aren't covered. So you came to Marcus, Lena stated, not as an accusation, but as a fact. Kai's face crumpled. He was a guy I knew from a rougher time in my life. He came to me with this one-time job, a way to solve all my problems. I was desperate. I thought it was the only way to save her. He looked at Lena, his eyes brimming with tears. I never thought about you. I mean, I did, but not as a person. You were just the key. I'm so sorry, Lena. I am so sorry. And in that moment, she believed him. The wall between captive and captor was dissolving, replaced by a bridge of shared desperation. Marcus and Rico, however, were a constant, menacing presence. They would come down occasionally, usually to deliver a threat or to remind her of her father's failure to comply quickly enough. Rico enjoyed her fear, his eyes lingering on her in a way that made her skin crawl. Marcus was colder, more pragmatic, but no less terrifying. Lena learned to read the room's energy the moment the door opened. If it was Kai, the air felt lighter, charged with a nervous possibility. If it was the others, the very atmosphere grew thick and heavy with threat. On the 7th day, the energy was particularly toxic. Marcus stormed in, his face a thundercloud. Your father is playing games, he snarled at Lena. He's involving intermediaries. He's stalling. He's trying to ensure my safety. Lena retorted, a spark of her old fire returning. His delay is what's making you unsafe. Marcus shot back. The deadline is tomorrow. If the money isn't where we want it, we move on. And we don't leave loose ends. His meaning was chillingly clear. He and Rico left, leaving a void of silence thick with dread. When Kai came down hours later, he was pale. They're not bluffing, Lena, he said, his voice trembling. They've done this before. If the ransom isn't delivered, they're not just going to let you go. The finality in his voice extinguished the last flicker of hope in her heart. She looked at him, this broken man who was her only tether to life. All the conversations, the shared confidences, the profound understanding of his pain, it coalesced into a single, reckless impulse. As he turned to leave, she stood up. Kai, he turned. The despair in his eyes mirrored her own. She crossed the small space between them. She didn't think, she just acted. Reaching up, she placed a hand on his cheek, then leaned in and pressed her lips to his. It was not a kiss of passion, but of pure, unadulterated need. A silent scream. A transfer of her will to live into his hands. It was a plea, a thank you, and a goodbye all at once. For a heartbeat, he was rigid with shock. Then, a shudder ran through him, and he yielded. His arms came around her, not in violence, but in a crushing, desperate embrace. His lips moved against hers, returning the kiss with a fervor that spoke of his own loneliness and terror. It was a kiss born in the shadows, a moment of stolen humanity in a place that had none. When they broke apart, they were both breathless. Tears streamed down Lena's face. Kai rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. I'll get you out, he whispered, his voice raw with emotion. I don't care about the money anymore. I'll get you out tonight. The plan was terrifying in its simplicity. He would create a distraction, a fake electrical short in the main panel that would plunge the warehouse into darkness. In the confusion, he would get her out through a side entrance he'd scouted weeks ago, a forgotten fire exit partially concealed by overgrown bushes. Wait for my signal, he whispered, his hand gently cupping her face one last time. The lights will go out. I'll come for you. The hours that followed were an agony of anticipation. Every creak of the floorboards above made her jump. Every beat of her own heart sounded like a drum heralding her freedom or her doom. Then it happened. A loud pop from above, and the single, accusing light bulb in her room winked out. The basement was plunged into an absolute, suffocating blackness. Voices shouted in the dark above. Marcus bellowing in anger, Rico cursing. Her door creaked open. A hand found hers in the darkness. "It's me," Kai breathed. "Come on." Quietly. He led her, his grip firm and sure, up the basement stairs. They moved through the pitch-black main floor of the warehouse, a labyrinth of shrouded machinery and ghosts of industry. She could hear Marcus and Rico fumbling with flashlights somewhere to their right. The fuse boxes fried. Rico yelled. "That wasn't a short, you idiot. Find him. Find the girl." Kai pulled her behind a large stack of wooden crates just as a beam of flashlight swept past their hiding spot. Her heart hammered against her ribs so violently she was sure it could be heard. He squeezed her hand, a silent command to stay still. After a moment that felt like an eternity, he tugged her forward again. They reached a rusted metal door. Kai worked a heavy bolt, which slid back with a groan that sounded, to Lena, like a cannon shot. He shoved the door open, and the cold, clean night air hit her face like a blessing. "Run," he said, pressing a wad of crumpled bills into her hand, his own money, she realized. "Follow this road east for a mile. You'll hit a gas station. Call a cab. Don't look back." But Lena turned back. She grabbed the front of his jacket. "Come with me. Please, Kai. They'll kill you." "I can't," he said, his eyes full of a sorrow that seemed centuries old. "I have to face this. And I have to get to Alara. I have to tell her. I have to be there. Then let me help her." Lena insisted, her voice fierce with a promise she knew she could keep. "My family, we can pay for everything. All of it. The best doctors, the best treatment in the world. Just tell me which hospital. Tell me her full name." A war raged in his eyes, pride, shame, but most of all, a desperate, flickering hope for his sister. Hope 1. St. Jude's Children's Hospital. Her name is Alara Vance. Room 814. He gave her one last, long look, imprinting her face on his memory. "Tell her I love her. Tell her I'm coming." Then he gently pried her fingers from his jacket and gave her a small push towards the road. "Go. Be safe." Lena ran. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs gave way. She stumbled into the bright, fluorescent lights of the gas station, a weeping, disheveled mess, and the terrified attendant called the police. She was free. The world rushed back in a blur of blue lights, sterile police stations, and the tearful, crushing embraces of her parents. She told them everything about Marcus, about Rico, and about Kai. She pleaded his case, explaining his desperation, his change of heart, his heroism. Her father, Alexei, a man who built empires on ruthless pragmatism, listened. And when Lena finished, her voice breaking as she described Alara, he simply picked up the phone. "Get me the head of St. Jude's," he commanded. "Yes, personally." Now, money was no object. By sunrise, a sum far exceeding Alara Vance's medical debts had been transferred. A team of the world's leading pediatric oncologists was being assembled, their expenses covered by the Kovac family. A risky, last-ditch surgical procedure, a bone marrow transplant from a newly identified donor, was greenlit and scheduled for that very day. Money, the very thing that had started this nightmare, was now being wielded as a weapon of salvation. Back at the warehouse, however, a different kind of accounting was taking place. The lights were back on. Kai stood in the main room, facing Marcus and Rico. He had packed a small bag. He was leaving. "You let her go," Marcus said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You betrayed us for her." "It's over, Marcus," Kai said, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. He stood his ground. "Her family is paying for my sister's treatment. You don't need the ransom. Let it go. Let it go." Rico sneered, stepping forward. "You think this is a charity? You think you can just walk away?" "The deal is off," Kai said, holding his gaze. "I'm done. I'm going to my sister." He turned his back on them, a fatal mistake born of a desperate need to get to the hospital. He took one step, then two, towards the door. Rico moved with brutal speed. He didn't use his fists. His eyes scanned the room and fell on a heavy, rusted iron crowbar leaning against a workbench. He snatched it up. "Traitor," Rico growled. Kai heard the movement and started to turn, but he was too late. Rico swung the iron bar with all his might. It connected with the back of Kai's head with a sickening, wet thwack. Kai's body went rigid for a split second, a silent, stunned gasp escaping his lips. Then his eyes, wide with shock, rolled back. He crumpled to the concrete floor, his bag scattering its meager contents. A pool of dark red began to spread beneath his head, seeping into the cracks in the concrete. Marcus watched, his expression unmoved. "Clean it up," he said to Rico, before turning and walking away. Kai had been a tool, and a broken tool was useless. At that exact moment, in an operating room at St. Jude's, a surgeon shook his head. Elara Vance's small body, ravaged by years of aggressive cancer and chemotherapy, was too weak. She had fought for so long, sustained by the love of her brother. But the strain of the complex transplant was too much. Her heart, a brave little engine that had run on hope for so long, finally gave out. The monitor emitted a long, steady tone. She died without knowing her brother was coming. She died without knowing he had saved the woman who had tried to save her. She died, ultimately, alone. The police raid, based on Lena's directions, found the warehouse empty except for one thing. The forensics team would later confirm the large, congealed pool of blood on the concrete floor belonged to Kai Vance. Marcus and Rico were ghosts, vanished into the wind. Lena learned the full, devastating truth in pieces. The detective, a kind-faced woman named Inspector Miller, delivered the news gently. They had found evidence of a fatal assault. Kai was almost certainly dead. And, in a separate, cruel twist of fate, his sister Elara had passed away during surgery. Lena sat in the soaring, sun-drenched living room of her family's penthouse apartment. She was surrounded by every physical comfort imaginable. She was free, she was safe, she was loved. And she had never felt more hollow. She had gotten her kiss and her freedom, but it had cost a good man his life. Her family had offered a miracle, but it had arrived at the exact moment the universe had decided to be most cruel. The money, the power, the influence, it had all been useless. It could not stop an iron bar swung in anger. It could not mend a little girl's broken body. She was free, but two souls, bound by a love purer than any she had ever known, were extinguished. Kai, the tragic hero, and Elara, the innocent victim. Their story was over, a short, brutal song cut off mid-refrain. Lena looked out at the glittering Seattle skyline, a world she had designed and built in, and now felt utterly disconnected from. She had loved him in their twisted, captive world, and he had loved her enough to die for it. The price of her heart had been everything. Thank you for watching. Share, subscribe, and like.